Joining us now is former Secretary of State and former CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Welcome to you, Mr. Secretary. What do you make of Russia's announced new naval ambitions?
Well, Trey, first of all, it's great to be with you. Being with you brings a smile to my face. Vladimir Putin does not bring a smile to my face, and his statement about America is just false. We don't present a threat to the people of Russia. The fact is he's conducted a war in Ukraine. He's been bellicose. He's done this in lots of places. He's conducted assassinations around the world when, in fact, the United States presents no risk to Russia or the Russian people. So he's kind of got it backwards. He's brought this on himself. As for being a great naval power, the Russian Navy is not likely to pull that off. We remain the great naval power. It's now sadly the case that the Chinese Communist Party has built out a naval force that is now threatening to be a rival for us in the Pacific. But Vladimir Putin's words today were very consistent with his history. He has this grandiose vision, Trey, this grandiose vision that reminds him of the heyday of the Soviet Union, a place that Russia doesn't find itself today, is not likely to be again. And yet his efforts to try and make Russia great again, to build out the old Tsarist empire, have really put a licking on his own people, put a real hurt on his own military, and frankly make it less likely that the Russian people will have a good, sound economy, prosperity, and security for themselves as well.
All right, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to switch around a lot, but you finished #1 in your class, so I think you can follow me. I want to talk about Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. You have been there. How do you negotiate when it comes to Americans being held overseas and whether or not to make a trade? What are those conversations like?
So they're really tough problems, Trey. A war on my heart every single day as Secretary of State that we had Americans that were wrongfully detained in Russia. With Paul Whelan was there on our watch. In Iran, we got a bunch of folks out of North Korea, but we weren't able to save Otto Warmbier. This is something that every Secretary of State and every president has to deal with. These are hard problem sets. When it comes to trades, there's a couple rules. One is the conversations need to be held in private. You need to have these conversations in a way that don't jeopardize the risk of the people who are being held or allow them to be used as pawns by your adversaries. Second, an express trade like the one that's being proposed is really dangerous. The guy that we offered up apparently is a bad guy who shipped arms around the world. The two people who are being held by Vladimir Putin are civilians who at most committed a misdemeanor. We ought not to be making trades of that nature. It's really dangerous because, Trey, you know this deal too, right? Tomorrow we'll make this trade. Everyone will celebrate. It will be fantastic to have Mr. Whelan and Ms. Griner back home. But tomorrow or the day after, there'll be some other American who's held as a pawn to get back some bad guy, some criminal, some terrorist we're holding here in the United States. It is really risky to engage in trades of this nature. I think this one won't make sense for America in the long run.
Let's switch to another adversary. Speaker Pelosi may or may not visit Taiwan. China is threatening U.S. interest if she does. Is a House Speaker visiting Taiwan really what China envisions to start a third world war?
Trey, I don't think so. I think that's unlikely. But the Chinese Communist Party has behaved in erratic ways of recent times, and I think they also view the United States in a place today where you can move around the cabinet an awful lot and there'll be nothing that responds to you. Think of the 13 Americans that were killed in Afghanistan, or the fact that our president said you could have a small invasion in Ukraine and that would be okay. I think that the risk that we've lost the deterrent force, the power, the good work that we did for 4 years increases the likelihood that Xi might use this as an excuse to do what he has long wanted to do. We shouldn't underestimate that risk, but at the same time, we shouldn't allow the Chinese Communist Party to issue a statement and tell American leaders where they can and can't go. Taiwan is an independent, sovereign nation. If Speaker Pelosi wants to go there and travel there, she ought to go there. She certainly shouldn't change the plans of her trip because of something the Chinese put out in a press release.
All right, I'm going to let you go with this. You've been CIA director. You've been a congressman from Kansas, #1 in your class, Secretary of State. There are only two jobs I can think of that are above the jobs you've had, Fox News host or President of the United States. If you were president, how would you deal with Iran? What would... Look, I'm not trying to get you to announce anything, but obviously I have a lot of confidence in your foreign policy acumen. How would you deal with Iran?
Well, there are other great jobs, too. You know that, Trey. Husband and father rank right up there, too.
Amen.
In terms of in terms of dealing with Iran, I think we had the right end of the stick. The only way you can keep Iran from threatening Israel, threatening the United States, is to deny them resources and money. And we had done that. We'd put them in a really tough place. This administration has already begun to not enforce the existing sanctions. They haven't put any new sanctions in place. Iran's economy will grow by something like 6 or 8% this year, Trey. That is devastatingly dangerous for the people in the Middle East, not just Israel, but the Gulf states as well, and certainly presents risk to us. The way you deal with them is straight up making it clear that you can't proceed down this path towards a nuclear weapon, and we will do everything we can within our power to deny you the economic resources to do that.
Mike Pompeo, one of my favorite colleagues, and if you can keep a secret, don't tell Ratcliffe. I think you were my smartest colleague. He thinks he was. Keep that between us. It's great to see you. I look forward to seeing you again soon. I'll keep it between us.
John may be right about that. Anyway, good to see you, Trey.
You too, Mike. Take care of yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.